A warm welcome to the day three of the Global Summit 2026. I'm your today's host, Jacqueline, Policy and Research Officer at GNDR. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please feel free to share in the chat box about yourself and where you are dialing from. It's the third day of the GNDR Global Summit. So, briefly about 2026 Global Summit, a summit where locally led civil society organizations from around the world come together to claim space, set priorities, and shape the future of disaster risk reduction and climate action. It is a summit led from the front lines, centering localization, collaboration, and community power at the heart of the future of resilience. We are gathered here today for a very special session, Localizing Disaster Risk Financing. We all know disaster risks are rising and their impacts, but often at risk communities and frontline actors struggle to access the timely funding to take risk reduction actions. So, to understand in depth the gaps and challenges, what actions we required for localizing disaster risk financing, we are happy to welcome an amazing panelist and an amazing partner for this session, Center for Disaster Protection. Before I welcome our speakers, a housekeeping announcement. This session is interpreted into Arabic, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. First, click the mute stage button on your top right of the screen. Then you can choose your desired language on the interpretation tab. Well, so exciting session ahead. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to invite Ben, Associate Director from the Center for Disaster Protection, and Blossom, Policy Engagement Officer, to share about the topic and on the beautiful initiative that we have been working together. So, firstly, let me hand over to Ben. Ben, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jacqueline, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you're joining us from. It's a pleasure to join you at this year's summit. I've been working at the Centre for Disaster Protection for the last 6 months, but I've been a long-term supporter and friend of GNDR. I remember when the network was being established almost 20 years ago now. A colleague, Marcus Oxley, was trying to establish this network, and it's so impressive and encouraging to see the network continuing to grow and thrive, and you're all doing such important work at the front lines of the climate crisis, and supporting communities in need. So it's a real pleasure to join you today. We will be looking at disaster risk finance, which becomes an ever more important topic as we face increasing impacts of disasters. Our work at the Centre for Disaster Protection is looking to try and improve the way we plan and prepare for disasters before they happen, so that the limited resources that are available these days can be used as effectively and efficiently as possible. And it's been a real pleasure to work with GNDR over recent months on a particular project. So I'd like to welcome my colleague Blossom, who can brief you on that project and why we're so excited to hear the results of it in the coming weeks. So over to you, Blossom.
Thank you so much, Ben, and thank you, Jacqueline, as well. It's such a pleasure to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Blossom, and I am a Policy Engagement Officer with the Center for Disaster Protection. Again, such a pleasure to be here to have this very important conversation. As Ben has mentioned, we're very excited to be partnering with GNDR on this very special project, and I would just like to take the next few minutes to speak about the center in a bit more detail and also briefly give a project overview of the work that we've embarked on with GNDR. So briefly on the center, we are a technical and policy advisory organization, as Ben has said, focused on improving how the world plans and pays for disasters. So the financing is more proactive, more evidence-based, and reaches more people before crises devastate lives. Our focus is on pre-arranged disaster risk financing that delivers protection for especially vulnerable communities so that governments and other actors are better prepared to respond when disasters strike. We combine rigorous research, technical advice, and global policy influence to shift international practice towards more effective, pre-arranged, and locally accessible financing. And this includes providing direct assistance to national governments and aid organizations, or technical training and operational matters pertaining to financing for disaster risk, as well as producing thought-provoking pieces of evidence, such as our annual flagship State of Prearranged Financing reports, which is currently on our website. We work to influence the policy environment as a whole in various ways, such as through our participation in the G20. So now briefly about the project that we've partnered with GNDR on. We're very pleased to have partnered with GNDR and its 2,000 plus member organizations to capture frontline perspectives on what is working, what is not working, and where local actors are included or excluded in disaster risk financing. And as part of this project, which is called the Localising Disaster Risk Financing Project, GNDR and the Center conducted surveys and regional thematic focus group discussions with local civil society organizations to build global evidence on access to finance at the local level. This enabled us to deepen understanding of the gaps and challenges in accessing financing at the local level. And we received over 300 survey responses from GNDR members, which we're very grateful for, from more than 100 countries. These responses captured frontline perspectives from across regions. We had 3 regional focus group discussions and 1 focus group discussion on conflict and fragile states, which further built on those findings and allowed us to take a more in-depth exploration of region-specific realities to unpack shared and unique challenges and identify practical, actionable solutions and recommendations on how we can move disaster risk financing at the local level forward. Based on these findings, we generated a roadmap and advocacy plan to bring change to the financing structure so that local communities and civil society could have better access to disaster risk financing. So we're very excited to further discuss about our project today, and I will now hand over to Jacqueline. Thank you so much for your time and looking forward to the engaging conversation.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you so much, Blossom. As Blossom mentioned, this initiative centers the voices of local civil society organizations and at-risk communities. So today is a very exciting day for us as we would be sharing the findings of this initiative with you today. It was a months-long work, and with a lot of hard work, today we are very happy to share with you. So to do that, next, let me welcome Shivangi, our head of programs, who would share with us the findings of this great initiative. Over to you, Shivangi.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. As Blossom mentioned, and also Jacqueline mentioned that early this year we had started with a global survey, and today I have this opportunity at this forum to share some of the key findings of this. So let me just start and reiterate what was already said. And next slide, please. So this is a joint initiative as it is established now with the Center for Disaster Protection, and it was a global survey where 330 civil society organizations participated across more than 70 countries and 3 regions. This largely was GNDR members, GNDR civil society organizations who have contributed. So those who are here, thank you very much for that. I think there were 2 purposes for this study. One was to elevate the perspectives and leadership of the local CSOs, particularly from Global South, in identifying context-specific challenges and effective pathways for assessing financing for local DRR actions. And second, to generate evidence on how at-risk communities and local actors across disaster risk finance, including funding for anticipatory and early actions. So it examines how and to what extent local and national actors are able to access disaster risk financing, but also to understand the barriers that they face, especially when we are talking about pre-arranged financing, and trying to also gauge that how what are those barriers which kind of act as an obstacle for speedy for faster, more predictable and more locally led action which is expected when we are talking about early warnings or anticipatory action. So we're trying to kind of go deep dive into this through this global survey, and needless to say that these findings align strongly with the Sendai Framework priorities, particularly priority three, which is investing in disaster risk reduction for resilience, and priority four, which looks at enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response. Next, please. So there are five broad parameter aspects that we covered during our survey. One was the organization's involvement with DRM, disaster risk management activities, awareness of pre-arranged finance mechanisms and strategies, predictability and speed of current funding for disaster response work, relationship with funders, and access to finance. Next, please. So we'll go in a little bit more detail, but not so much detail because we have very less time and I have just 10 minutes to finish that, but I'll try my level best to cover it all. The first being organizations' involvement in DRM activities, and the sub point was we were trying to understand the depth and scope of engagement, DRM engagement of our civil society organizations. So the organizations are clearly engaging in disaster risk management, but the approach remains quite fragmented. While disaster risk management is integrated across humanitarian development and advocacy work, very few organizations are into this whole complete circle from preparedness to recovery, thereby limiting overall impact. At the same time, the work is heavily concentrated in fragile and conflict affected context with strong focus on capacity building and climate change adaptation. And although gender is widely mainstreamed, it is not consistently applied across the full DRM cycle, highlighting a gap between commitment and practice. Next, please. And within that aspect of organizations' involvement with DRM activities, we also try to find out about what are those current resources or sources of disaster risk financing. We found that it is largely externally driven and imbalanced. Most funding flows through international NGOs with support from UN agencies and foundations. And when I say we found out, is the perspective of our CSO members. So let me stand corrected in that. While national and local government financing and local mechanisms remain quite weak, especially in the fragile context. At the same time, the funding priorities are not fully aligned with needs. While capacity building, climate change adaptation, and policy advocacy receive attention, and and there are certain critical areas like anticipatory actions, preparedness, and recovery, they still continue to be underfunded. This also highlights the gap between where resources go and where they are most needed. Next, please. The second aspect was on the awareness of pre-arranged financing itself. Pre-arranged financing remains limited and largely reliant on a very basic tools. Most countries stated that they depend on disaster risk financing strategies, contingency funds, and budgets, while more advanced instruments like contingent credit and risk transfer are still underutilized. Access is also highly uneven. Government backed insurance is weak, and mostly limited to agriculture, while high-risk regions, including fragile contexts and small island states, have very limited coverage. As a result, many countries continue to rely on external post-disaster funding rather than being financially prepared in advance. Next, please. And then moving on the local actors' involvement in pre-arranged financing, that's the subject that we are dealing with, localizing disaster risk financing. So we did find that local organizations are engaged in pre-arranged financing systems, but their influence still remains very, very limited. Their role is very, very confined and often confined to only community consultations, with very less involvement in program design, uh, targeting, or financial decision making. So it's a major constraint that the local civil society organization face. At the same time, access and power are highly concentrated among few actors. Many local organizations are excluded altogether, and their technical capacities remain underutilized despite clear evidence of their potential. And I think we heard one of those examples yesterday in one of those sessions. This highlights a critical need to shift from participation to genuine decision making power at the local level. Next, please. On the third sub aspect, next please, of direct use of pre-arranged finance by local actors do not have access or have a very limited direct access to formal pre-arranged financing systems. Most are engaged only indirectly, despite demonstrating strong capacity to deliver anticipatory actions, for example, through triggers, contingency planning, and early warning linked responses at the community level. What's clear is that local financing mechanisms are often faster and more flexible. However, national and global systems remain slow, very, very rigid, and heavily intermediary driven. I think in this session we'll also have some reflections from our speakers on that. This disconnect continues to constrain true localization and limits the effectiveness of anticipatory actions. Next, please. On the fourth aspect, where we were trying to find out about the perceived value of pre-arranged financing, of course, it has its clear advantages, especially in fragile context. First, it offers speed. It enables faster, timely responses, which is critical where conflict and access challenges can significantly delay actions and increase losses. Second, it strengthens the localization by supporting frontline actors, supports them in making faster decisions, and help them act effectively. And the third one is predictability. Having pre-arranged finance ensures more reliable resources, allowing for more better contingency planning and continuity in high-risk environments. Next, please. And coming to the fifth one, barriers to scaling pre-arranged finance. One of the greatest barriers that was found from this survey was that local CSOs feel that they are systematically excluded from pre-arranged financing systems. The primary barrier is not capacity, but access to finance. Without direct, flexible funding, frontline actors are unable to respond in a timely way. At the same time, power and decision making still remain concentrated among international organizations, limited meaningful participations of local actors. Uh, gaps do exist. They are, although not the root cause, they reinforce deeper structural and financial barriers that continue to exclude local CSOs from these systems. Next. On the third aspect of predictability and speed of current disaster response funding, and we touched upon in my earlier slide, but deep diving into that, access to disaster funding remains both slow and inadequate. Only about 9% of the local actors receive funding immediately after a shock, while many wait over 3 months, delaying response and worsening the impacts in fast moving crises. What is clear is that timely and predictable financing is essential. It enables earlier action, better targeting, and helps reduce secondary risk. At the same time, predictable funding strengthens preparedness and localization. So I think this is still a very limiting aspect, that the accessibility of disaster funding is very, very slow and inadequate. Next, please. The fourth aspect which we touched upon was the relationship with the funders, governments, and international organizations, starting with government engagement and localization. Uh, Most of our respondents said that CSO and government engagement is strong but not consistent. Many of the CSOs do collaborate with the governments in disaster risk reduction and response planning, but gaps in inclusion remain, limiting more systematic and equitable partnerships. At the same time, CSOs play a very critical uh, frontline role. They connect with the communities and with the local government systems, supporting early warning and other responses, and also bringing in that essential local knowledge. So, with pre-arranged financing, this role can be further strengthened, enabling more structured, anticipatory, and collaborative engagement. Next, please. And then looking at the partnership and intermediated access to PAF, which is pre-arranged financing. Pre-arranged financing basically remains unevenly understood and poorly communicated. There is limited awareness and transparency around how this system works and who can actually access them within the partnership. As a result, local actors are largely excluded, with very little funding reaching the front line. This highlights the disconnect between the institutional mechanisms and the local access. At the same time, while engagement is inconsistent, there is strong demand from CSOs to be involved, specifically in co-designing more relevant and anticipatory financing approaches. Next, please. And the fifth and the last aspect was access to finance. And we explored what respondents had to say about access to direct financing and localization barriers. Uh, they are not about the capacity. Interestingly, it is about the systems that they are in place. The processes are complex. The criteria are very, very restrictive. There is very limited information and very heavy compliance requirements, which excludes the CSOs in meeting those requirements and trying to access those direct financing. What we also saw that, or what we also kind of read from that was, uh, there's a strong demand for change. Local actors are calling for more simpler, predictable, multi-year funding, with pre-arranged financing seen as a key pathway to improve access, timeliness, and equity. Next, please. And the last one was on the aid cuts, cost effectiveness, and localization case. I think it is the time that we are in. Of course, the local actors are being hit the hardest because of the aid cuts. More organizations are already affected or expect funding reductions, with local CSOs particularly vulnerable due to their reliance on external funding and limited financial buffers. This puts definitely sustainability at risk, and it undermines the ability to prepare for, respond to, and reduce disaster impacts. And importantly, there is a clear mismatch. Local CSOs are often the most cost effective and impactful, yet they remain the most exposed to funding cuts. With this, I will end my presentation. It was a very, very quick run through, but I would like to also mention here that we are going to come up with a full report, and which should be available in couple of months. Thank you all for your listening. Thank you so much. Jack, over to you.
Thank you, Shivangi. Thank you so much. So, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box to share your questions with us. So now it's time for the most exciting part of the today's session, which is the panel discussions. But to take us further to the panel discussion, I would like to invite our wonderful and amazing moderator, our partner and colleague with whom I love working is Chris, the head of policy engagement from the Center of Disaster Protection. Over to you, Chris.
Jacqueline, thank you. And what an introduction. I'm not sure I can live up to that, but hi, everybody. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, Jacqueline, and thank you, Shivangi, for that fantastic run through. Admirably brief, because there's a huge amount in the report, and we look forward to sharing the details in full in the near future. So I will moderate our panel discussion now. We've got some wonderful panelists. I will introduce them as we go. Just a couple of reminders. As Jacqueline's already said, please do post your questions. We will have Blossom back with us at the end, who will try and capture a couple of those, time allowing. And a reminder, I think one of our speakers, Sandrine, will be responding in French. So do make use of the translation button as needed. Finally, just a note to the panelists. We are on a tight time scale here, and we had to start a couple of minutes late. So I will ask you all to keep your answers brief, 4 minutes or so, to ensure that we have time to try and at least get into one or two of your questions at the end. So on that note, let me invite the panelists to join us now. I'm hoping that we have Sandrine here. So Sandrine is the chargée de programme for ONG Femmes Enfants Vertes from the Central African Republic. Please excuse my French accent. Sandrine, I'll ask the same question to you and to Lily, who will join us shortly afterwards. So both of you GNDR members. But from your experience, could you tell us a little bit about what you see as the biggest barriers that your community faces in accessing disaster risk financing, and how do those barriers affect your ability to act early and to build resilience? So, Sandrine, in a couple of minutes, over to you.
Bonjour à tous. Alors, je vais faire une présentation en français. Je suis Madame Sendai, responsable de l'organisation Femmes Enfants Verts en République centrafricaine. Alors, j'aimerais partager avec vous quelques obstacles qu'on a au niveau d'Afrique sur la question de gestion des catastrophes. Et principalement en République centrafricaine, ces dernières années, on est confronté à des catastrophes naturelles comme l'inondation et aussi l'érosion. Et vous savez qu'en République centrafricaine, qui est à la sortie des guerres, des crises politiques militaires, se heurte aux défis structurels sur la question de gestion des risques et des catastrophes. Alors, bien qu'il y a des opportunités de la part du gouvernement et des autres partenaires qui essaient de faire quelque chose, mais ce n'est pas encore ça. Alors, les 4 majeurs obstacles que nous avons au niveau de la centrafricaine pour l'accès au financement, pour la gestion des risques et catastrophes, sont ceux-ci, que je vais citer rapidement. La précarité économique et budgétaire. Tellement qu'il y a des priorités. Vous savez que le pays sort des crises et au niveau du gouvernement, il y a des priorités. Donc, les questions de la priorité, ça concerne beaucoup plus combattre la pauvreté, les questions de nourriture, de logement, de la santé et l'éducation. Et du coup, les questions de gestion des catastrophes reviennent en arrière. Donc, c'est une des préoccupations que nous avons. Deuxièmement, on a des défis au niveau institutionnel et de gouvernance aussi. En République centrafricaine, il n'y a pas assez de gens qui ont la capacité de comprendre ces questions de risque et catastrophe et autrement. Parce qu'il y a des gens qui ont déjà leur formation professionnelle à part et qui, par la force des choses, on essaie de comprendre cela. C'est pourquoi le renforcement de capacité de notre pays sur cette question est vraiment très, très important. Si on ne comprend pas comment on peut discuter et comment monter des projets pour avoir accès à des financements. Donc, c'est un aspect très important. Et aussi, nos budgets au niveau national ne répondent pas aux besoins même de la population sur les questions de la gestion des catastrophes, des risques et des catastrophes. Donc, ça aussi, c'est très important. Deuxièmement, les défis liés à l'institutionnel et de gouvernance, comme on a dit, et aussi la manque de coordination. Donc, vous voyez, dans le cas de l'événement qui s'est produit il y a 2 ans de cela, c'était l'inondation dans un quartier proche du fleuve, sauf les premiers intervenants étaient la Croix-Rouge centrafricaine. Donc, vous voyez un peu ça pour que le gouvernement puisse maintenant coordonner avec les organismes internationaux et les ONG internationales. Il n'y a pas vraiment une coordination, ni avec même les organisations de la société civile au niveau national. Vous voyez, il n'y a pas une coordination pour permettre à ce que ces questions de gestion des risques catastrophes soient bien menées. Troisièmement, il y a aussi les obstacles socioculturels. Il n'y a pas de sensibilisation comme il faut. Les populations ne sont pas informées n'ont pas assez d'informations sur les risques et les catastrophes. Donc, je pourrais dire que près de 43,5% des résidents ignorent les initiatives sur la gestion des risques et catastrophes. Vous voyez un peu, sur ça, je parle de tout le territoire, population sur le territoire. Donc, il y a manque d'informations, manque d'éducation sur la participation de la communauté et au projet de financement. Donc, ça aussi, c'est un aspect très important qu'on doit voir. Il y a aussi des questions de sécurité foncière. Les gens peuvent, au niveau rural, les gens peuvent utiliser les terres comme ils veulent, même si c'est inondable, ils les habitent, ils utilisent, parce qu'ils n'ont aucune idée dessus, aucune information que là, ça peut être un terrain qui, après une forte pluie, il peut avoir inondation. Ils n'ont pas les moyens. Et puis, c'est difficile. Et aussi, les questions de titres fonciers, les propriétés aussi, restent un aspect très important qui fait que la population n'arrive pas à vraiment avoir des informations qu'il faut. Il y a aussi l'absence des services financiers adaptés. Le secteur bancaire, on a en banque, on a juste 5 banques commerciales et qui est seulement centré en République centrafricaine. Vous comprenez? Donc, ça veut dire que dans les autres villes du pays, il n'y a rien. Et c'est difficile d'avoir accès à un crédit pour un privé ou même pour une organisation. Donc, les microfinances, même sur la question de changement climatique, il n'y en a pas. L'accès même pour les ménages vulnérables, pour avoir un fonds, après une inondation, ils peuvent avoir un fonds pour nourrir leur famille et mettre leur famille dans un état qu'il faut, c'est difficile. Donc, vous voyez, tout ça, c'est un problème. Le dernier problème, c'est la fragilité des infrastructures. Il y a le retard structurel. Si vous arrivez à Bangui, vous allez voir qu'il y a moins d'infrastructures modernes. Il n'y a pas de route, il n'y a pas de drainage, il n'y a pas un mécanisme d'alerte précoce, rien. On cherche à le faire et ça, c'est difficile. Et avec, vous voyez, tout le coût des interventions et le déroulage des investissements privés dans la réduction des risques, c'est vraiment quelque chose de très important. On est là à la merci de la nature. Donc, c'est quand les catastrophes arrivent que le gouvernement se lève pour alerter. Mais à nous, maintenant, la communauté, les responsables, nous travaillons auprès de la communauté. C'est à nous de chercher les moyens qu'il faut pour alerter la communauté, pour dire à la communauté que voilà, la saison pluvieuse qui arrive, chez nous, la saison pluvieuse commence au mois de mai. Je dis que dans 2 mois, voilà ce qu'il faut faire, voilà ce qu'il faut faire. Donc, il nous manque des moyens aussi de sensibiliser pour une sensibilisation, c'est comme aussi un moyen d'alerte pour la communauté, comme nous sommes la communauté. Voilà un peu les points très importants ou les obstacles qu'on a. Et maintenant, en ce qui concerne comment on doit capaciter qu'on doit faire pour renforcer sa résilience, Ok, en République centrafricaine, les problèmes financiers font de sorte que ça, les organisations, la société locale deviennent vraiment très faibles et qui ont une capacité limitée d'agir en cas d'urgence et aussi d'agir à long terme. Donc, je pourrais dire ça, et aussi la rapidité d'action. Donc, ça nous manque de rapidité. Puisqu'on n'a pas les moyens, on n'a pas de finances, c'est difficile aussi d'agir. Et aussi, il y a aussi l'impact sur le renforcement de la résilience. Même si on agit et qu'on n'a pas assez de moyens, cette action ne sera pas si durable. C'est pourquoi on aimerait partager avec ces lieux qu'on a au niveau local. Merci.
Sandrine, merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. And apologies, I think we had some issues with the sound. I'm hoping that others could hear what sounded to be some really, really great insight. So thank you. Please do stay with us. We will try and make room for any questions for the panel as a whole shortly. But thank you for that. And on a similar theme, I'd like to now invite Lily to join us. Lily is the other GNDR member who will be providing her perspective. She's a regional director with ASB South and Southeast Asia and is joining us from Indonesia. And Lily, hi, great to see you. Could I ask you the same question? So from your experience, what are the biggest barriers that we face at a community level in accessing disaster risk financing, and how does that affect your ability to act early and build resilience? And just a reminder, if we can, and apologies, try and keep 4 or 5 minutes just so we can hear from everyone. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Chris. Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be joining the session today. I will start by situating my perspective first. So I'm speaking from an INGO that works closely with local CSOs and including local organizations of people with disabilities. And we're very aware that INGOs are often seen as intermediaries in the system. But in our work, we try to play more of an ally role. We become the facilitator, we become the supporter, so that they can be able to navigate the systems, access resources, and also strengthen their leadership. And over the past days in this GNDR summit, I think we've heard a very strong message, an important one too, coming from everyone participating, that local actors are best placed to lead DRR because they're the frontliners, right? And I completely agree with that. So maybe I'll just focus on what gets in the way of that in practice. But first, one thing I want to highlight first is that there are already many disaster risk financing instruments out there. So I know that there's sovereign insurance, contingency financing, catastrophe bonds, but most of these, they sit at the macro level, so national or global level, and they don't easily translate into something that local organizations can actually access quickly or directly. So the issue is not how much financing exists, but how it connects to the local level where risks are actually experienced and managed. And from what we see in our work, there are a few key barriers. And the first one is what Shivangi already mentioned earlier. It's about access. Many local organizations, especially grassroots groups like organizations of people with disabilities, they simply cannot meet the requirements to access financing directly. So for example, they're asked to show a track record of managing large grant, and we know that even though they're closest to the risk, they're actually having difficulty to be able to demonstrate that, so they're effectively excluded from the system. The second barrier is about the process. So funding applications are often complex, they require technical knowledge and also very time consuming. And when you're dealing with imminent risk or imminent disaster, of course, time is something that you don't have, right, Chris? So by the time the funding comes through, the window of early action is actually already gone. So that's the second barrier that I see a lot. The third one is about preparedness. I guess also this is related to the findings mentioned by Sifani earlier, that only small proportion of organizations work in full cycle of DRM. And this is something that we're seeing also. I think the last time ASB had a full CBDRR project it was around 2016, so like a decade ago. And nowadays, it's all about resilience building. So, for instance, projects related to socioeconomic development, which is great, of course, very important. But we know that if there is a limited investment in preparedness and risk management, we can see those gains made in the development projects can be quickly erased. So for us, actually, this points to a bigger issue. I see that disaster risk financing is often understood as funding only, but in reality, it's also about risk management. It's about how financing is structured before disasters happen. And this is where anticipatory action and pre-arranged financing become really important because they allow local actors to act early instead of waiting for decisions or approvals. And because of these barriers, back to your question about the impact, I think local organizations are often pushed into reactive role. So even if they see that risk is coming, they don't have the means to act early. And that limits their ability to really build resilience over time. And in our work, just to give a very small example, that I believe small things can make a big difference. For example, for our local partners, we try to establish pre-arranged financing and made it accessible through a simple process so that they can act immediately when disaster occur. So it's not just about how much funding there is, but it's about predictability, accessibility, and also trust. So maybe just to end, I think if we are serious about localization, Chris and everyone, I think the financing system needs to change also. They need to become more accessible, more flexible, and more anticipatory so that local actors, they can not only respond, but can actually lead. Thank you. Back to you, Chris.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lily. And a lot really resonates there. I think your point, not about how much exists, but how it connects, the time pressures around not doing business as usual when dealing with disaster risk, and particularly your point on this not just being about the money, but about the risk management discipline and processes that come with it, and that these mechanisms can force thinking on. So thank you so much for that. Really, really great points. Let me turn now, if I can, to Sarah from the FCDO. And Sarah is the Crisis Resilience Policy Lead in the Humanitarian Policy Group there. Sarah, I wonder, we've heard from some of the countries and some of the actors actually on the ground here. From your perspective, from the FCDO side of things, how important is it to pre-arrange finance for disaster risk, and how important are local actors in delivering the impact for that?
Thanks, Chris. And a big thanks to GNDR for hosting this really important and timely event. So just speaking on behalf of FCDO, I'll tackle your first question first on the importance of pre-arranged finance. Again, from the UK perspective, pre-arranged finance is essential if we want to manage disaster risk well, because as earlier panelist said it enables earlier, faster, and more cost-effective action, including an anticipation of shocks. And so this is why pre-arranged finance or PAF aligns with UK humanitarian reform priorities, we really see pre-arranged finance as a key element of reformed humanitarian crisis architecture. And what this specifically looks like for us in this moment in time, I can give you a few quick examples. So the UK has highlighted anticipatory action as a humanitarian reset priority. And we also have a recent ministerial commitment to annually track and publish our pre-arranged finance spend. And we are leading a coalition through the Sevilla Platform for Action to encourage other donors to do the same. And that second question, the importance of local actors in delivering for these systems. Of course, we see local actors as absolutely central to these systems. The UK is committed to a humanitarian system that is locally led and internationally supported. And we are striving to support a system that is as local as possible and as international as necessary. We all know why local actors are so important to these systems, but just to highlight a few reasons, again, we know they understand risk best. We know local actors enable speed. We know local actors improve targeting and accountability. They can deliver better value for money. And of course, they anchor disaster risk finance into national systems, which is absolutely critical if we want these systems to be sustainable and if we want to scale these systems as well. But of course, as other panelists just highlighted, we know despite the importance of local actors, they continue to face systemic access barriers to disaster risk finance, to pre-arranged finance. And this includes restrictive eligibility criteria, complex compliance requirements, and reliance on intermediaries. And we've heard that local actors are again and again confined to consultation or facilitation roles with limited involvement in decision-making and programming design and access to funds. So I think if we're thinking about strengthening local leadership in pre-arranged finance, it's really a systems and power sharing challenge rather than addressing some kind of capacity gap. And as others have pointed out, we really need to see those reforms in the way donors are funding, in the way finance flows, in governance and program design. And just to end by highlighting a few things that the UK is doing in this specific area, again, at this really important moment of time, we are currently strengthening our policy to put locally led action at the forefront of how we deliver our programming. We are looking again at our own systems, and we are improving our own systems so local actors can access funding more easily. This includes simplifying reporting, changing due diligence requirements. We are, of course, continuing to support the Grand Bargain commitments, contributing to humanitarian reset to see that humanitarian system that is locally led and internationally supported. We are currently looking to embed locally led principles across our programming guidance. And of course, we are continuing to champion locally led funding models. So I guess just to summarize, again, just to reiterate, the UK views locally led action and pre-arranged finance as integral components of the humanitarian reset. And we are rethinking and pushing on our side on how to make this possible. Thanks, Chris.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sarah. And actually, one of the things that really stood out to me, it's not about capacity, it's about systems and power sharing challenges. And I think that really sort of speaks to the work we're doing here. We are rapidly running out of time, lots to discuss. I'm hoping we can now bring in Evie from the World Bank Senior Financial Sector Specialist there. Evie, I know you have to leave on the hour. In 3 minutes or less, how can financial institutions design mechanisms that enable timely action and strengthen resilience for at-risk communities? And over to you.
Okay, great. I'll keep it to the point. Hello, everybody. Hope you hear me well. As Chris said, my name's Evie Calcott, and I'm with the World Bank's Disaster Risk Financing team. And I'm actually going to just quickly answer the question in terms of a project that I'm working on called Repair. REPAIR, which you can find out more online. But very briefly, repair is about strengthening countries' resilience to shocks through financial and operational preparedness. And so we're working as a bank with the Ministries of Finance in 12 African countries, and in particular Malawi, Zambia, Mozambique, Madagascar. There's a longer list, to support them implementing this program to do just as I said, so that they have pre-arranged finance, that when a shock occurs, they can draw on that money, but they also, very importantly, have pre-arranged operational response plans and programs that are already proven. They have environmental and social systems in place, all the governance structures, monitoring of those disbursements so that funding can reach beneficiaries very quickly. And those disbursement mechanisms can be government systems, but actually in some countries, they're the kind of alternative channels that are effective and that the government pass to other implementers to deliver. For example, the Red Cross in Zambia would be one of those institutions. So it's linking the disaster response with the financing, but in a very concrete way. On the financing, governments have set up a risk-layered strategy. So they have reserves, they have contingent credit from the World Bank, and they also can use funding for parametric insurance. And that's kind of in the process of being implemented. Countries have come on board at different stages, but we're now at 9 countries. The program's implemented regionally for the purpose of sharing knowledge. So I'm actually in South Africa right now on our annual meeting where countries are just spending a couple of days sharing a lot of experience. And ARC Limited, so African Risk Capacity Limited, are the regional implementer responsible for helping countries with the instruments, building the knowledge and capacity, and supporting them to have the right technical assistance to make sure this financing and operational work can continue. My last point, being brief, just a couple of examples. So we have had activations. We've had a couple of activations in Mozambique where repair as a project has dispersed, and this year, we've also had activations in Malawi and Madagascar. So recently, Malawi drew down just over 2 million to respond to floods in a very specific district, and they worked with their partner to disperse the money quickly. In Mozambique, to respond to severe floods, they drew down 20 million for food, shelter, medicine, wash kits, all of those things. And again, dispersed quickly. And I'm talking the money from the project flows within 5 days now. It started at 10 and it's got quicker. So this money can get to the Ministry of Finance quickly, and they've already organised who's going to disperse it. And then also in Madagascar as well. Key lessons, it's all about immediate liquidity. It's important to monitor how progress. We have a third-party monitoring agent to support countries, but also to assess what could be done better. And then working with already successful implementation channels to make sure that there's no kind of kinks in the delivery, whilst separately through other programs at the bank, building up other delivery channels so that they would meet the bar to be used in the future. Thank you, Chris. I'll stop there.
Evie, that's brilliant. Thank you. And thank you for making the time for this at what sounds an incredibly busy point, but great to get those examples, that point on immediate liquidity and the mix of different instruments there all combined under a single umbrella with this regional footprint, I think is great. Thank you. And we're lucky to actually be able to hear from 2 of the big international financial institutions. So for our final speaker, let me bring in now, unfortunately, certainly on my screen, possibly for others, still appearing as a second Sarah Claassen. We actually have Brigitte Balthazar from the Asian Development Bank. So Brigitte, thank you. And thank you for your patience with this. To close us out, can I ask you from your perspective, the key constraints that financial institutions like ADB face in directly supporting locally led disaster risk finance work, and how can instruments be adapted to better reach and empower local actors? Over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. And I try to be very brief. Very complex questions though. Yes, so as I think we all agree that we need to really get to the local level. As disasters are not isolated and they are systemic, cascading, and the impact is really at local level. So the question is really to move from disaster financing to financing resilience at that level, early and at scale. So to answer your question, I think there are three key kind of design limitations, maybe, very briefly. So first of all, the institutional constraints, because financial institutions are accountable for risk scale and reporting. For example, when working with the local level, small actors and communities is quite complex and can be costly to really match those different players, which is then the structural mismatch. Most financing instruments are designed for national governments or larger projects, and that is just the mismatch with the local impact. So that leads to the third point that I wanted to make, is the capacity and the interface gaps, where as mentioned earlier, local CSOs, they lack the access to the financial systems, trust, and the predictability of those channels. But you can flip it as well and say, like, bigger, larger financing organizations, they lack the trust, and how do they do their reporting with those partners? So what could practical pathways look like? Very briefly, 4 key points that I wanted to make is maybe an intermediated model where we bridge this last mile. And I think we need to be really intentional to do that, and working through local governments and cooperatives to aggregate those. So really moving from the larger scale where we have national government programs, and we integrate the intermediaries in between. Just to add an example, we do develop some insurance products for cities or municipalities, and using the existing systems in place to then reach the local actors, like social payout schemes, etc. So that really reduces the transaction cost while keeping the local ownership. Secondly, moving towards rule-based financing, so that we develop programs that are pre-arranged throughout, so that they really lead to activation at national level, but we have a system in place that trickles down through the system to reach local actors, which needs a lot of engagement, etc. And I think that we can talk a long time about this. Very briefly, the third is looking into micro projects. So working with local institutions like banks to aggregate there, and integrating insurance and pre-agreed finance into lending opportunities for small and micro enterprises, for example. And the last point is to really strengthen the local ecosystems. It was mentioned earlier before that is key to build that trust and to bridge from the different systems. And so very briefly in closing, we are running out of time. So if we want to reach the local communities with the financing, I think we need to strengthen the system that is already in place to serve local communities. So if we can use that and channel financing, I think that would be a great opportunity. Stop here.
Brigitte, fantastic. Thank you. And loads there. You say we could talk for a long time about some of this. I may take you up on that offer, but unfortunately, we don't have time collectively now. So it's great to hear from those speakers. We are slightly over, and I know there's a packed program. So we won't have time for questions, I'm afraid, but this is ongoing work. There will be more opportunities. Let me hand you back to Jacqueline just to outline what those are and to close us out. But thank you again to all the panelists. Jacqueline, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much. Thank you to all our panelists. Risk reduction action should not just be locally implemented, but we believe it has to be locally led. In this regard, to amplify the evidence of the great outcomes of this initiative, we would host a roundtable discussion in London. So stay tuned with us. More information you would see in our website and in our social media. So we are towards the end of the session. And before I close, thank you to our panelists for joining us today. Your insights are invaluable, and thank you for your time. Thank you, Ben, Blossom, and Chris, for your support and for this amazing partnership. Lastly, a big thanks to my GNDR team. Special thanks to Danny and Abdullah for their working tirelessly so that the session could run smoothly. So before we close, please head to the session section of the platform where we would be starting 3 member-led sessions and skill labs. So you can click on the session button on the left-hand side of the screen, and we will see you there soon. Thank you so much, and thank you for joining this session.